Welcome to Keep the Line Moving, the podcast where leadership meets life and inspiration. Here we spotlight extraordinary leaders. We're diving deep into how they inspire, motivate, and lead with strategy and empathy to achieve the extraordinary. Here we go. Episode 126 of Keep the Line Moving, and the topic, living your dream and trust. And what does one have to do with the other? We will explain through this fascinating conversation with our guest, Joel Goldberg. He's the pre- and post-game show host on TV, Bally Sports Kansas City's coverage of the Kansas City Royals. He also does hits throughout the game from all around Kauffman Stadium. Joel is a podcast host. His podcast is called Rounding the Bases. He's also an author. His first book came out in 2020. It's called Small Ball, Big Results, about the small things that add up to the big wins in baseball, business, and life. And then in early February of this year, his second book came out called Small Ball, Big Dreams. It's an inspiring collection of stories that showcase resilience, passion, and the pursuit of purpose. Joel will explain how he gained the trust of Albert Pujols while working in St. Louis. And then there's an overarching theme throughout Joel's discussion here today. The journey never goes as planned. So how do we live our dreams, even though it's not a straight line, right? We all know that. How to deal with failure and challenges. Joel has some great stories that we're sharing here today. By the way, Joel and I were introduced by our mutual friend, Damon Lemby, who's also been a guest on this podcast, Keep the Line Moving. But now it's Joel Goldberg's turn, and here's the conversation. All right, Joel, welcome. I notice you're wearing your Kansas City blue today.
Yeah.
Tell us about this. I mean, you have this wonderful career. You've been with the Royals since 2008. You host the pre and post. You do a lot of other things with them in the community. What does your schedule look like as a broadcaster for the Kansas City Royals?
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, because mine is different than all of our other broadcasters. Meaning, first off, I was already at spring training the day that full squad started. I was only there for 48 hours. I think that's going to be the only 48 hours I go. If I end up popping up, it's because some kind of need came up. Our guys in the booth will be there to call a handful of games on TV, and then those guys also do radio, and so they're there pretty much all the time. My main purpose of going, and I do in-game reporting during the season, but my main reason to go for spring training, it's twofold, and there's a lesson here too. There's always a lesson. One is content. That's the obvious part of the job, but the other piece, which I think is sometimes harder to sell to the people that come up with the budgets and the justification of going, is that every moment that I'm there is a chance to connect with players. Not in a, hey, you want to go hang out? I don't do that. I'm too old for that. These guys are a lot younger than me, but to continue to build that trust, which is really what I'm doing at work every single day. And that's the piece for anyone that is listening to the podcast that is similar to any other profession. When you strip aside, okay, yes, it is cool to be paid to talk about baseball and go to games and travel on team charters and stay in fancy hotels. Yes, all that stuff is a nice little perk, and it's cool. And there are days where it doesn't feel like a real job because you're getting paid to do what you love, and it is amazing. But in the end, it's still the people business. That to me is the best part about spring training. And the 48 hours that I was there is, yes, I did a bunch of interviews, but how can I connect with the new guys? How can I continue to further the relationship with the players that were here the last couple of years, and then touch base with the guys that I've known a long time? That's the name of the business to me.
And that's a great point about trust. So let's dissect that. That is so interesting because you and I have similar backgrounds. I spent many years in the NFL as well as Major League Baseball, and you have to have that trust so the players, the coaches, and folks that you're talking to can open up. It's a beneficial relationship for the fan, the organization, the players, everyone involved, if there is that trust. How did you learn that? That, yes, I can't just go up to someone transactionally and say, hey, how'd you hit the curve the other day? They're going to pretty much nowadays laugh at you. So how did you learn that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, I'm not sure anybody teaches it, and it should be taught. It should be taught in every journalism school. It should really be taught in any business school. It should be taught in medical school, nursing school. I mean, all of those things, because I think that if you're in a profession that involves people, which is going to be most, maybe not all, but most, then this stuff's important. And, I don't think that what I'm doing with the athletes is any different than anyone that is trying to sell. I don't view myself as a salesman, but I'm selling the relationship and the trust piece, and that takes time. How did I learn it? Through failure, through not understanding why I couldn't always get the big interviews, and taking it personally over the years, and wondering why this guy wouldn't talk to me. And then I learned that you've got to find a way to connect, usually with people that in theory you have nothing in common with. I mean, okay, I love sports, great. So does everybody else that is out there. So does everybody else that's watching. I'll skip to the very end of the kind of career changing moment for me, and I wrote about it in my first book, Small Ball Big Results, is that it took me 7 years to earn the trust of Albert Pujols. Now, he's not only the greatest ball player that I've ever covered on a regular basis, but he became one of my go-to guys. And I could have never envisioned that during my struggles, because all I kept wondering was, why is this guy being such a jerk to me? Why is he blowing me off every time? Why will he oftentimes not even answer and just walk right by me? And so it had to be that he was a bad guy in my mind, because he wasn't giving me what I needed. And so, I've learned through Pujols, once I figured out how to stop asking and to try to connect with him on a more human level, and to hear years later him say to me, everyone wants something from me. Once I trust you, I'll do anything for you. That I learned, and wish I'd known from the beginning, that until you build the trust, it's just a crapshoot, and you're hoping that you get it, and you live with the wins and losses. And not that the trust is foolproof, in part because you never stop building it and sustaining it, but you got a lot better chance of getting in the door when they know who you are and they know you. And so that's the way I go about my work every single day.
And Joel, in your two books, Small Ball, Big Results, Small Ball, Big Dreams, and you just referenced your story with Albert Pujols, which was in the first book, which is so important. Let me ask you this. To gain trust, you have to do one specific thing across, like you said beautifully, across all different industries, baseball, football, or corporate, right, or medical, whatever it is. There's one key element to gaining someone's trust. What is that?
I mean, for me, and this, there are layers to this, but I mean, I would start with finding commonality. That's it right there. But the layers to it are finding commonality, and then being who you say you're going to be, which means being where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, and doing what you tell them you're going to do. Once you find the commonality, if you're showing up in a consistent way, and the last piece to it, so I'm finding a way to stick three things into one answer, is being vulnerable. And with Pujols, it was asking for his advice. Instead of asking for him to do something, I asked for his advice. I valued his opinion. And so that after finding commonality, that was the key. Or if you really want to boil it down, and we'll see if I make the cut on these answers here, just be real. I know that's so obvious, but we tend to forget to be real when we're trying to get something we really need, and we push, we end up altering our plan. Like, just be real and connect with people. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've established this. So you nailed it. Your reasons were tremendous, and they all involve listening. Joel, let's look at this. So you're with the Royals. You've had a world championship. You've been to the World Series. You've seen it. What is the organization? Tell me about the Royals organization. When you walk into a building, there's a culture, right? When you walk into that beautiful stadium, which it really is, what do you see, feel, and how do the Royals do business?
I'll explain this in, I guess, anecdotally, which is what I do. And a couple of quick things went to my mind. The first was, remember last season, my in-laws were in town, and I just remember after the game, I got my wife and my in-laws tickets, and my mother-in-law couldn't stop talking about the service that she received from she walks okay, but to go for long distances, she generally will need some help. And I mean, from the moment she walked into the door to the seat, they were going to make sure that she was taken care of. By the way, they didn't know that she was my mother-in-law. That's the organization in a nutshell. And you know that the good sports organizations, whether they're winning or losing on the field, and fortunately for us, the Royals won last year, but they were 106 losses the year before. But at the heart of it all was the way they treat their people, the people that are coming in to their stadiums, the people that are involved in it. That includes us. I'm technically not a team employee. I mean, not technically, I'm not. I'm an independent contractor, and the way they treat me, I would never know that I'm on the outside. I'm considered family. They consider people family, and I think I would just sum it up by saying, you remember during the pandemic when all the minor league stuff was being canceled, and most minor league players who don't make a whole lot of money lost their salaries that year, and the Royals decided to keep all their minor leaguers and pay them, and they didn't have to. That to me is the organization, and that to me is any good organization. Are you going to take care of the people in your universe, and are you going to do it on a consistent and regular basis? And Chris, it goes back to what you just said too. I mean, about trust. That's how you earn people's trust, by providing them real, authentic experiences, care, just the humanity of it. It's so often forgot because we're in a rush to do everything. And I get that piece, but I think that there's a lane there for all of us when we can actually do those things. They're not that difficult to do. When we can do them, it sets us apart.
And that's right. You know what, Joel, you bring up a great point. It's not that difficult to show your own humanity and to be humble and care for people. And that is a perfect segue to your most recent book. Let me get it right. Small Ball, Big Dreams. And you focus, which came out in early February, on resilience, passion, and the pursuit of purpose. And when I say that's loaded, and I love how you always bring in anecdotes. So tell me, why write the second book? What was the genesis there? What fueled that? And how's it being received? I know it's only been a short while, but tell us
Yeah,
about it, please.
it's been good. I'm just hearing from a lot of people that are finding inspiration in it. That was the hope. The first book, I'll back up, Small Ball, Big Results, really was meant as a compliment to my motivational speaking. And I'm getting out and talking about culture and team building and leadership all the time. And so small ball, for the non-sports fan, small ball in baseball is the bunts, the sacrifices, the little things that may not show up in the box score. We will forever be fixated on the home run. That could be a metaphor as well for life. We celebrate the big anniversaries and the purchase of a home and all of that, but we don't oftentimes talk about what it takes to get there. And that's small ball to me. This one, Small Ball, Big Dreams, as you said, grit, passion. I started thinking after Small Ball, Big Results that I live in this world of people talking about their dreams. I mean, how often do you hear the athlete after a big moment talk about, this is what I dreamed of growing up, right? And what I dreamed of growing up was being on TV. Now, the dream was not hosting Royals live pre and post game shows, but at the time, I just, all I wanted to do was be on TV because I loved sports and I loved to talk about it. I didn't realize that my role would be to talk to these players about their dreams. And there is no better interview to do than a guy that just made his big league debut. And hopefully he did something in the game. And I've got him, and hopefully it's at home. And so I'm doing the star of the game interview on the field, and it's being piped into the crowd and live on the TV. And his family's up in the stands. They got flown in, and he's waving to them. And he inevitably says something like, "This is what I dreamed of in the backyard." And so that's the spirit of this book. And then taking all the experiences in baseball away from baseball, my podcast and speaking, it's a book full of dream stories. And I think, Chris, that to me it was, yes, I want to provide inspiration for anyone out there to embrace the journey, because none of this ever goes as planned. None of it is in a straight line. And that's true for these ball players. And some of the stories in here are harrowing stories of whether it be drug addiction or whether it be being told no every step of the way, on and on. It's like these guys are the most freakish, amazing, natural gifted athletes. Some have to work harder, some don't, but do, and they become the greatest of all time. The Michael Jordan types, but none of it's been easy. They make it look easy oftentimes. And I think to me, this book is something that anyone can relate to because we've all been through that adversity and we'll all continue to go through that adversity.
Great point. And I want to talk more about this. But you've got me going in so many different directions. By
It's
the
what I
way,
do.
and when you and I talked, we not all the time, but as often as I can, I will do a pre-conversation with my podcast guests. And you and I talked the other day, and it was like I've known you for. We have a lot in common, needless to
Yeah.
say. It was amazing. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I'm enjoying this one. And you said something to me about the title of my podcast, which is a baseball term:
Mhm.
"Keep the line moving," which you and I are so aligned in that, which means hit behind the runner, which is being unselfish when you come to the plate. If you have to lay down a bunt, we're starting to get back to that. To your point about home runs aren't everything nowadays. It's not always grip it and rip it. The teams that win can hit behind the runner because the shift has changed now. The pitch clock, there's a lot of different elements of baseball that requires more of a team mentality, in my opinion. Let me get back to something you said, Joel, that's really interesting. You talked to all these players to support your book, and they all talked about dreams, and it's not a straight line. They overcome adversity in this. What else did you learn about players? And I'm going somewhere with this, and I'll follow up with what I learned, but I want to hear first what you've learned.
So I think what I learned is that they're really no different than us. Their abilities, their physical abilities, how many of us can hit 100-mile-an-hour fastball? And oh, by the way, the next pitch is going to be 75. So good luck timing that one out. But they all have the ability to keep pushing forward. That's the commonality. But they're all different. Like they're all humans. And it's not as easy for some of them as it is others. They're all going home to stuff. They're no matter what kind of money they're making, and some of it's ridiculous money, and some of it might be slightly relatable to the rest of us, but they're still going home to pay the bills and take care of families, and they still have sick family members, and they're still dealing with mental health nowadays. And I think that each one of their journeys, I have yet to meet a ball player that has the exact same story in how they got there. The ones that I like to tell are the really, really unique ones. I've got a chapter in here about a relief pitcher that was drafted as an infielder from the Milwaukee Brewers, and wasn't going great, and he converted to pitching, and then he got pushed out, and they cut him, and he's trying Dominican Winter League, and he's trying independent ball in New York, in your area, your neck of the woods, and he was ready to give up on it, and he started delivering FedEx packages all day long during the holiday season, and then he'd go back home, and his younger brother, who was a college pitcher, would take him out to the park in Queens, and they'd throw every single night, and eventually he got noticed and ended up making it to the big leagues. And so, like, nobody else has that story, but there was something there's that little something about never giving up. That sounds so cliche to me. The how to on the never giving up is a lot deeper of a question, but I hope that answers it. I mean, to me, there's more in the differences in their journeys.
You and I talked before hitting record today, and I wanted to bring up what's going on, and you're a perfect person to talk about it. To talk about serendipity here, my friend. The ESPN Major League Baseball divorce, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
right? That they're not going to go forward after this current contract expires at the end of the 2025 season. And I'm not going to get into the business of it. Major League Baseball could do this, and ESPN could do that. What I do want to talk about is this beautiful game, and how some of the ESPN announcers don't necessarily talk about the game within their talk shows, right? And I've been going back and forth with this since the news came out last week or whenever, is that baseball is a game of talk. And I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've lived there 40 years of my life. Baseball was all over the airwaves. It's a beautiful thing, and I love it. And now I live in the Northeast in New York, and they do a fantastic job of talking the Yankees and the Mets. So I've been spoiled. However, on the national scene, the game isn't talked about as much. I'm sorry for being long-winded, but I'm very passionate about this. I think it would cultivate, perhaps, children seeing the game more often or debating it themselves. And everyone says it's a regional sport. I understand that, but it's also a national sport.
Yeah.
And for goodness sakes, it used to be our national pastime. Your thoughts, my friend?
I think the first thing I would say is that if it is a regional sport, so is the NBA. And no one does talk personality better than the NBA, specifically TNT, because they landed the unicorn, right, with Barkley and Shaq and Kenny and I think one of the great studio hosts of all time, Ernie Johnson Jr. And you could see others trying to mimic that. They've tried to do that with their NHL crew on TNT now. ESPN tries to do it with some of their personalities. But let's talk about the younger generation. And I'm talking about 40 and under, say. They consume differently than we did because they've grown up in an era where they've had so many distractions. And so what are they consuming? Why do people love the post-game interviews that I do? I'd love to think that they love it because of the great questions that I ask. But no, they like the splashes, the Gatorade splashes. They like the personality. They like the fun. And then what happens is, for us in Kansas City, Salvador Perez, their legendary catcher, has dumped that Gatorade bucket for years. They call it the Salvi Splash. It's an institution here in Kansas City. People stay in their seats to watch that. Why? Because they get personality. Why are people watching Inside the NBA on TNT? Because they get personality. They never know what Charles is going to say. And I'm not saying you got to be a shock jock to do this. I'm saying that people want access and they expect access. And baseball it's not specifically an ESPN thing. People want to be taken on the inside. And shame on baseball for not doing a better job on that. Shame on baseball for so protecting their past that they sometimes get stuck in the past. One of my favorite quotes that actually appeared in my first book, Small Ball, Big Results, came from one of my earliest podcast guests, and it's the CEO of H&R Block. Jeff Jones said to me, speaking about their company's history, but I think it would apply to baseball, there's a slippery slope between tradition and irrelevance. You have to honor the past, but you can't get stuck in the past. And I think baseball's past is better than any sport in America, and that's still what makes it America's pastime. And their records and their history and their Hall of Fame and everything, I think, are far better than any of the other sports. But I think they do a really, really poor job of staying relevant in the future in a day and age where fans, especially younger fans, expect to be brought right into there, expect to see the personality because they're seeing it on TikTok and they're seeing it on Instagram. And when those Salvi splashes end, Chris, when those Salvi splashes end, and now Salvador Perez, for the most part, has passed it on, and Bobby Witt Jr., their young emerging star, does it with another one of his younger teammates. And the second that they finish doing that splash, they run into the locker room, and there's usually someone from social media waiting for them, and they throw out a quick message to the phone that's being recorded, and it immediately goes out on the social media. The younger generation expects that, and baseball has to allow it to happen more because the NBA and the NFL, they do a heck of a job of selling their people.
Great point. And I'm rooting for baseball. Yes, they need to make some adjustments. Yeah. You articulated it great. All right. Are you ready for all-star moments, my friend?
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. We will get to all-star moments in just a second. To grow as a leader, you must make intentional choices about how you want to show up for yourself and your team. Are you ready to grow your leadership? The Gargano Leadership Group offers expert coaching, consulting, and workshops rooted in our 4 leadership pillars: curiosity, alignment, optimism, and self-awareness. Leadership starts with forging authentic connections, communicating your values, leading with energy and enthusiasm, and truly understanding yourself. Visit garganoleadership.com to get started with us today. Back to the show. First thought, best thought. These are quick responses, and you're on your toes. All right. Your favorite baseball moment of all time in your life?
Favorite baseball moment of all time in my life? I got to go with the work. And 2014, Royals hadn't been in the playoffs in 29 years. Extra innings after a big comeback down 7-3 to Oakland in the wild card game. First appearance, Salvador Perez hits a ball down the line to lead to a walk-off in front of a packed house. If they lose, 29 years wait and they're gone. They win, go on to win the next 7 games, make it to Game 7 of the World Series. None of that happens without that moment.
You grew up a Philadelphia Phillies fan, correct?
Yes.
Who's the better third baseman, Mike Schmidt or George Brett?
Oh my gosh, is George listening to this? I think George would say Mike Schmidt. Mike might say George Brett, but I'm gonna go with Mike Schmidt. And my apologies to the guy that wrote the forward to my book, George Brett. I should just say George because of that.
George Brett was my favorite player growing up. He and Schmidt were on my wall. I played third. Your favorite all-time Kansas City Royal? I'm really putting you on the spot. I apologize, but I got to get this out of you. What do you think?
I guess if I had to pick one, it'd be Salvador Perez because he's the biggest personality. I think he's a future Hall of Famer, and I've now spent more time with him than anyone else that I've ever covered.
The best manager of all time, and it doesn't have to be a Royal, although it could be the best manager of all time, because you talk about leadership and your keynotes and your book and all of that. Who would that be?
I am so thoroughly enjoying the manager that we have right now, who's going into his 3rd season, Matt Quatraro, who is a guy that came from Tampa and before that Cleveland. And the reason why I say him, there's something very cerebral about Matt Quatraro. I love his leadership. He's soft-spoken, but completely knows what he's doing and can take charge when he needs to. He's the most human manager I've ever dealt with. They're so inundated with stuff that somehow he is able to be like your neighbor next door, but still has a competitiveness. That was too long of an answer. I'm going with Matt Quatraro.
That was nice. Good answer. Last one. In your podcast, Rounding the Bases, who is the guest that has made you feel something? You said, my goodness, I hit record today. I didn't know I was going to feel something today. Geez, that was impactful, that interview.
I have to go with a rapper by the name of Tech9. He's out of Kansas City. And I love having people on the show that maybe somebody wouldn't expect. The moment to me, and I actually wrote a chapter on this in the book, In Small Ball Big Dreams, is asking him what he dreamed of being growing up. I was laying the groundwork for potentially a story for the book, and I did that with a lot of guests. And his answer blew me away to the point where I use it oftentimes for audiences. I'll use it tonight. I'm speaking to a group tonight. He said, I actually wanted to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but they didn't teach that in my schools. He was in the inner city in Kansas City. So I went to the library and I'd steal the books to learn about it. But then I went down a path of becoming a dancer, and from dancer comes rhythm and comes music. And here he is, a 50-something-year-old rapper, saying to me while he's on a tour bus, having lost his voice at his concert the night before in Memphis, driving to New Orleans. I offered to cancel. He said, nope, let's do it. And for an hour, he just brought his energy, total performance. And he says to me, over time, I realized that I'd hear from fans at meet and greets or hear from fans on social media who said, you saved my life with your lyrics to this song, or you inspired me, or you helped me with a bad time with bullying. And I realized that my desire to be a psychiatrist or psychologist ended up happening because of my music. And so it ended up taking me ultimately to where I wanted to be and to my purpose. And that just resonated so much with me. It was like, wow, we're all doing something greater than we realize if we're paying attention to it.
Great story. Joel, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Likewise, Chris. Thanks so much for having me on, and I will look forward to having you on soon on Rounding the Bases.
And we thank Joel very much for being on the show. I have several takeaways from this conversation, but I'm going to hit a couple here. The first one is the Albert Pujols story. You heard Joel, what he said. He didn't always go up to Albert and ask him for something. No matter what we're doing, whether it's the business of baseball, football, basketball, hockey, or the business of college athletics, or the business of corporate, whatever it is, to gain somebody's trust, you cannot always be transactional, asking for something, or always going for the business at hand, right? It needs to be relational. We talk about this all the time on this podcast, relational conversations where you're just asking someone, how are you doing? Or what's going on? Or did you see the game? Want to get some coffee? And then ease into the business. You heard what Joel did with Albert. He asked for his advice. gaining trust, not in a manipulative way, but just understanding what Albert does. The fact that he has to always have someone come to him asking for something. So Joel had the presence of mind to maneuver in a way that made Albert feel comfortable, and they gained mutual trust. It's the same way in business. The second takeaway is what the Royals did for the minor league players during the pandemic. You heard Joel say that the Royals still paid those players. Not only did they garner trust with those players specifically, but everyone in the organization can observe that gesture. And that is contagious, that trust. And that is how healthy cultures are created. The Royals made the playoffs last year, losing to the Yankees, but that was a very successful season. Speaking of seasons, the Royals host the Guardians on March 27th, opening day 2025. We wish them nothing but the best. We thank Joel very much for coming on. I thank you each and every week for being part of Keep the Line Moving. We'll see you next time on KTLM Extras. Take care, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Keep the Line Moving. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a review. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Most importantly, share this podcast with your friends, family, and coworkers. It means the world to us. If you have a guest recommendation, visit our website at garganoleadership.com, where you'll also find all our archived episodes. For our marketing coordinator and the producer of this podcast, Savin Narwhal, I'm Chris Gargano. Have a fantastic week, everybody.